we had, one girl quit and she was like, I owe you guys everything. Like, you guys changed my life. I'm so loyal to you, but you can't stay. I'm like, what is happening? Like, I don't want it. It makes no sense. And then she was like, she ended up sending it to our HR person at the time. She was like, don't tell them, but like this police thing. And we're like.
From scrappy founders to 8-figure success stories, we're busting startup myths, getting raw insights from market-tested entrepreneurs, and revealing the proven playbook for bootstrapping your B2B startup to 5 million. This is the Startup Different podcast.
On the show today, we've got Jess Chan, founder and CEO of Longplay. She's an expert in retention marketing who's built an 8-figure business, and she's here to share some seriously useful lessons for entrepreneurs. Oh, and she also tells us one of the wildest HR stories ever. It's Startup Different. Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of Startup Different. I am David. This is Christopher, and today we have Jess. Jess, how are you?
I am fantastic. I'm so excited to be here.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
I don't believe you, but thank you for being here.
I had like 3 shots of espresso in the morning.
Oh, wow. I 3 is right when I have like the opposite effect. It like actually puts me to sleep. Do you ever have this?
Like a 4 p.m. it could go the other way, but and I don't do.
No, like if I have
the morning
3, and like I got a couple kids too, so I definitely need like a healthy dose of coffee.
Yeah.
But I find if I have that third one, I am in troubled territory. Same for you.
Oh yeah. Like, I want it so bad, but if I have it, the third cup of coffee just like messes me up.
No, it has to be all at once, like 1 triple shot.
Oh,
large.
Whoa. Oh, wow.
But if you do 3 in a row, that's
how
too
long
much.
do you drink it for?
Like 2 hours.
Okay,
like I'm sipping on it.
Okay, you just sip on this. It's a very different approach. I'm like, I'm gonna finish.
No,
a
it's
cup.
not like a shot.
Oh, I don't know. Like,
okay.
It could, for all I knew, it could have been like 3
That's
individual
true.
glasses, like a vodka shot, basically.
And that's how you start a business.
Yeah. And today's episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Anyway, okay. Thank you so much for joining us. We just did a killer intro all about your success, like an 8-figure business, the CEO of Longplay. We'd love to hear your story. How'd you get there? How'd you start your career? And how'd you get into like entrepreneurship specifically?
Yeah. I'm trying to think about where to start, but I think for me, it traces back to, my background was in actuarial science and economics at U of T. Cool. So the most like nerdy mathematical, super math.
Yeah.
And then, like midway through university, I'm like, you know what? I don't really see a future of being in an insurance company, cranking out numbers for the rest of my life.
Yeah. It's a very boring future.
It's not fun.
No disrespect to any insurance people.
It's fun for some people. Just I think I would die.
This episode is brought to you by Sun Life. No, sorry, keep going.
And so I had actually entered into a period of like panic attacks, depression, just like a dark, like year-long period. And in that period, at the end of that year, I was like, you know what? Like, kind of have a choice. Like, I can either be in this like crappy, dark thing for the rest of my life, feeling like really stuck, or I can just turn off my brain and kind of like be my own boss. And like, this mantra I had at that time was, if I can't wake up feeling good, at least I can just turn that off and like do the right things to eventually maybe get there. And so that was kind of when I entered into the whole self-development world of like Tim Ferriss, Seth Godin. Nice. Like I would, run for 3 hours just listening to Tim Ferriss podcast. Sick. And it wasn't like, I wasn't inspired. I was just like, at least there's something to do. So like every morning I would wake up like 6 a.m., like, read for 2 hours, run for 3 hours. And then I started creating these little projects for myself to like give myself some sort of purpose.
Okay, cool.
And so in that process, dabbled in like UI, UX design. I remember I ended up getting a job as a JavaScript developer until my parents were like, you can't take this job. You don't know how to develop. You're not a JavaScript developer. I like hacked my way into like getting a job offer, and then I was like, you know what, that's a rational piece of advice.
You can't do this.
You can't do this, so you shouldn't take this job. But all of that kind of led to ending up applying as a marketing assistant at a company called Best Self Co., which was productivity tools for entrepreneurs.
Cool.
Oh, cool.
It was perfect. Ended up as a marketing assistant there in my 4th year. Did that in another job part-time. And then when I graduated, they offered me the position of chief marketing officer. Cool. And I remember thinking like, this is the world's most unqualified promotion of all time.
Yeah, when did you know about marketing?
I'm like, I've been in this
actuarial sciences or whatever. Like,
I've been in this industry for 6 months part-time. No clue what I'm doing, but I like hacked my way through it. Yeah. And then I also got a job at a B2B firm, essentially taking the things I learned there and like applying it. And so between the two, I ended up going with the CMO job. And this was at a time where, e-commerce was like still very like, it was taking off, but it wasn't like mainstream yet.
What year
this was 20. So I joined 2016, 2015, 2016.
Okay. Yep.
And then went full time, maybe like
Like it was
2016-ish.
happening, but it wasn't like as mainstream as
Like
it is
the
now.
average person didn't know what like e-com was, right? And so took that full time, and my parents being like, this makes no sense. Like you have a degree to have a guaranteed job, and you're gonna take an internet company role with people you've never met. I ended up becoming like the best decision ever. So I ended up running with that company for 3.5 years. Yeah, they were great. Like they're super supportive.
That's great.
Just at every point they're like, this makes no sense, but like
You do you.
you do you,
Yeah,
and they're like, oh, that worked out for you.
Hey, we're taking a short break to tell you some exciting news. Chris and I wrote a book. Surprise! It's called Startup Different, the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business, and it's available now. Like our show, we're trying to pay it forward to our fellow entrepreneurs. The book busts 33 business myths, tells some of our most hilarious stories, and gives you many of our best tools to build, scale, and exit your business. You'll find the book on all major online retailers, including Amazon. Check it out. We think it's pretty great. And now, back to the show.
Good for you.
Yeah, which is great,
That's
you know?
cool. Sweet.
And so I think that was like the perfect first job because, you know, it was early stages in the industry. So we were kind of at that stage where you could do whatever. I was able to act like an entrepreneur without having the risk of being one. And I was working directly with the co-founders. And so there was so much like hands-on experience there. And then we were creating productivity tools for entrepreneurs. So like in that whole process, I'm just in that world day in and day out, and then ended up building that team and left, you know, 3.5 years later just to start Longplay, and that was kind of taking off.
I mean, that's such an awesome set of experience that you got at that company. Sorry, what was it called again?
Best Self Co.
Best Self Co. Like when you think like you got such a breadth of experience there. Like you got all this marketing experience. You brought that B2B knowledge with you. You had some HR stuff there too around managing that team and building that team. So I guess you were building tools for entrepreneurs. Like you were like, so that was almost like entrepreneurship school for you. Like you were so on your way to that.
It was perfect. And it was also just at that stage. Like I think there's this, I feel really lucky that I was at that stage where it was a small-ish team, but with enough resources and still enough people. Like we still had a team of like 15, 20 people. So you kind of get a sense of things without it being too big.
Yeah.
And also we were very profitable at that stage as every e-com business was. Right. And so everything we touched kind of turned to gold so we could test anything. Like we built a software tool, we launched an event, we, you know, hosted like webinars,
That's really cool.
you know, we created physical products, we created digital products. And so like you said, it was that like breadth of experience that could then eventually apply to like client management, building a SaaS company, all of that as
It's amazing. This is the stuff you can't learn in school. This is the stuff that you have to actually kind of experience it out in the real world. What an amazing way to incubate your entrepreneurial skills. You know?
So like, why leave? Because you had all these options. You were building out this cool stuff. You had not unlimited, but like considerable resources. So why'd you leave?
I think there's just always for me that itch of like, I want to fail on my own terms and I want to keep learning. And so the company was incredible. Co-founders are fantastic. Like I still
exists.
It still exists. It went through its own journeys. I still have a great relationship with both the co-founders, but I think I just kind of reached a point where I'm like, I can't grow anymore in this company the way that I would want to and explore on my own. And I think that's always been the catalyst of like doing the next thing. Even like later on in my journey as well as like, I just got bored. And I wasn't bored because the work was boring. I was just bored for myself. And I got like good enough at the thing. And so ended up when I left Longplay or left to start Longplay, at that point I'd already actually started consulting and doing some freelance work. So by the time I made the leap, Longplay in itself was like, you know, revenue generating, profitable.
Right.
And then I shifted over.
Nice.
Yeah.
So your jump was a very soft landing, basically, because you already had revenue coming in from your own consulting business.
Yes. And I think, you know, related to startup myths, I feel like there's this entrepreneurial myth that like entrepreneurs are risk takers. And I actually think the best entrepreneurs I've met are actually very good at risk mitigating.
Yeah. I
And
totally
it's
agree.
like,
100%.
It's like, I'm like,
Imagine we were
I
like,
want
no way.
zero. I'm like, no risk. And I'm like, and if you do need to take, like, you do need to take those like big swings, but how do you do it in a way where I'm like, I have like crossed off all the T's and like dotted all the I's on like making this as no fail as possible. And even if we do fail, it's not going to be so big of a fail that we go out of business.
I think too, from the outside looking in, it looks like a big risk, but to the entrepreneur, they know it all. They know a lot of information that the casual observer doesn't know. And that's why I think people think it looks risky when the entrepreneur is actually like, no, I don't think it's that risky. So really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like, and also we're actually just like entrepreneurs, generally speaking, are just very good at making calculated risks, which is kind of what you're getting at. I think it's just the idea that, you know what you're getting into, but that's cool. Yeah, and that's definitely a huge myth. That's one thing I think people get wrong. Like, oh, you have to be like super risky or take these big bets. Like, no, like that's a really good way to lose your business or lose your quality of life or whatever it is you're trying to do.
Did we ever buy that big gong thing for when we busted a myth?
No, Producer Graham, do we have a gong? We do not have a gong.
We were joking that we were going to get a big gong, and then anytime we bust a myth, it's just like boom.
Or like we should like break a glass.
I love it. No, my partner and I actually just found a new place to move into, and I'm like, we need a Chinese gong at the door.
Yes. Well, people when they arrive, they can
I'm like, I want everyone to gong themselves in.
Dude, like there's so many practical reasons for a gong.
Yeah.
Like, let's be serious.
Yeah, you're like, bad day,
Bad day,
gong.
boom. Yeah, you're like, oh, a little bit better. You feel like the vibration in your chest. You're like, oh, thank God. Okay, cool. This is brought to you by Gongco. All right, so you have your company, you're getting going. So give me some numbers on your company, if you're willing to share. Like, where is Longplay at right now? Like, so you had this soft landing, but how did you grow to that point where it is now? Like, tell me a little bit more about the company.
Yeah, so Longplay now, we're essentially like mid 7 figures,
Nice.
Team about 25 to 30-ish,
Okay.
fully remote.
Nice.
A lot more profitable than most agencies in the space and very like consistently profitable,
Wow.
which has been amazing. We have put our blood, sweat, and tears into like team training and culture.
Cool.
I think that's probably one of the best things
Sweet.
that we've done. And so the journey of Longplay is interesting because I scaled to, so when I first started the business in 2019, mid 2019, that was by myself, hired some freelancers and things like that. Scaled to $1 in the first year
Oh, sick.
as like my first business. And,
Wow.
it sounds,
Yeah, you must just be like, I am sick.
but also like it's rough. Like it is really hard, especially service-based business
Yeah.
where the more revenue you produce, the more
Work
like work
you have.
and the people, like your people are your product
Right,
in a
yeah.
service-based business. So the complexity in which I was equipped to manage at that time increased way faster than, like, for example, if I build a software tool and a scale to $1 million, the software tool kind of stays as it is, and you don't need to hire that many people. And so
You can find ways to scale
Yeah.
it differently.
I'm sure there's.
I think what you're saying, like, I think with a service business, you, at least at first, your way probably to scale a lot of it is to bring on more people till you figure out tools or ways or produce internal tools that can make you more profitable or more efficient to be more profitable.
Yeah.
But
And I think just it being my first business, like out of the gate, I'm like, what is happening right now? And so
well, maybe tell the viewers actually too, like what the business is, just so.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I know for
No,
us,
this
like
is
we
good.
know what's up.
Yeah. So Longplay is a retention marketing agency for direct to consumer e-com brands. So essentially, we started in just email and SMS, and then now we act more like a head of retention, head of lifecycle marketing. So essentially, the way we say is like anything to do with helping brands maximize their customer lifetime value.
Cool.
Is the place that we live in. But we
Nice.
don't do any acquisition. We don't do any ads. We don't do anything like
Crazy
that.
valuable. Crazy
I'm
valuable.
like, so
space
I
to
want
be
all
in.
the unsexy, like retention stuff.
I don't think your business is boring, but I love boring businesses.
I love boring businesses.
Yeah, see, that's how you.
And I'm like long play. I'm like 10-year plan. I don't care about the next year. I care about the next like.
Is that,
10,
is that why
20
it's called long play?
Yeah.
Oh man,
It all worked out.
I totally nailed that. You suck. Anyway,
Long-term, sustainable, scalable, profitable growth.
Love
where
it.
everyone's just happy and like having fun.
everyone's
like,
just.
that's all we want.
Is that what's the tagline? Everybody's just happy. I could get into that. That's a good one.
more like long-term, scalable, sustainable? But I think you
Okay.
need that stability for everyone to have a good time. Right?
The long
Like,
play.
Long play.
I
Love it.
Playing the
Actually,
long
is
game.
very, very
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah,
We actually had a guest on well, actually, I guess it was last season now, but they were kind of like people like undervalue like just consistency, like just going in and working on it every day and moving it forward and moving the business forward. Like so many people talk about, oh, I got to get big fast. I got to do this like crazy thing. And I love that take because it's just like, no, most of the time it's just keep working at it. Keep your cool. You'll actually be more creative, more innovative, as opposed to being just like constantly stressed about some like arbitrary number you're trying to hit. So
Yeah, I think that emotional discipline has been a really good reminder the last year, 2 years is like this important thing in entrepreneurship where I'm like the emotional discipline to like see when everyone's running a little bit faster. Like if you're playing the long game, there's for sure moments where it looks like everybody else is winning because they're doing like
Right.
the quick fixes.
Right.
And so people's graphs are going to look better for the next 6 months, 12 months, or like they're riding the wave, and we're like, we're just going to keep doing the same thing. Like, I hope this is the right move.
That must be so tough to resist that.
I think that's been the hardest part of the entrepreneur journey, honestly, is like not getting caught up in the wave or like the hype or like trying to keep up with the Joneses, like entrepreneurial version of that.
Totally, yeah.
And also not being like horse with blinders.
Yeah.
Like it's a balance between the two of like, you kind of need to pay attention on like what's going on industry wise, so you kind of know how to adjust.
Well, you must have times where you do have to push it for some reason, you know, like a customer is demanding something, or like a really important customer, for example, or a big paycheck potentially for something, and you have to kind of like push a little bit. But you're like, that would be true, right?
Yeah, and I think it always has to be service driven versus like, we're gonna hit these business goals. Like anytime I've set revenue goals, the motivation is they're so arbitrary.
Yeah. They're
versus like, we want to do better work for the sake of it. Like we want to create this thing, and our team and myself also has been motivated most by like, oh, if we hit this revenue, if we do this thing well for this client, we deliver this well, this revenue comes in or this profit comes in, which allows us to do this next cool thing.
Yeah.
That's really exciting for everyone.
That's cool.
It has to be tied to like quality of work or like quality of life.
I think we were best guided when we just focused on what can we do that's good for our customers? How can we build our products, improve our products, and make them better for our customers? And then revenue and profits just followed kind of automatically. Right?
Yeah. I think if you're like legit, I don't know, it's kind of an easy way to put it. We almost called the book The Legit Startup. But then we were like, but then everybody else is going to think we're calling them not legit. You know what I mean? But anyway, it's all good. But I think that's a really interesting point, though. It's really just, you're going to feel those pressures. You're going to feel pulled towards doing something quickly. And sometimes you might have to, move a little bit. But on the whole, like, as long as your strategy is like consistent, moving the business forward, you'll be in a better place.
For sure. And sorry to add on, like, I do think some of it is like learning how to trust your gut. And, as 3 people who've kind of like been through the process, we have this luxury of like being able to trust our instincts and our guts now. But also I think early on is like, you shouldn't trust your gut. You have like nothing to,
you don't know.
You have no idea.
There's so much anxiety.
Yeah, and being too confident in your own instincts early on, I think, is just as dangerous. And you just kind of, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, lost so much money here. That was that was a super dumb decision. Like, and I'm like, it's kind of nauseating seeing how much was lost. but it's part of the process. Like, you need to make those mistakes to be like, oh, okay, like that was my gut. I didn't go with it because of XYZ reason. And like, okay, that was actually validating. Or like,
I tell this story in the book where in 2013, 2014, I want to say. So we worked with a lot of universities and colleges, and we didn't have a U.S. client, and it was really hard to break through the border for us because the American universities don't really talk to Canadian universities, whatever. And so we had this big presentation for an Ivy League school down in the U.S., and we probably had like 10, 15 universities and colleges on our platform. And we were like, I think I quoted them like $1 billion. And they were like, and we had no credibility, and we were up against like a market incumbent that was like worse than us. Like, their product wasn't as good, but they had some street rep, right? And we lost the deal. And I look back on that so often because or at least I did when we were still in the business. I would look back on it all the time being like, man, I totally blew that. 2 years later, we ended up getting our American client. 2 years. Yeah. Like, think how different is the trajectory of the company, the competitive landscape, all these other things if I had just not quoted $1 billion. So anyway, those decisions eat you alive, though, right? Yeah. There's a lot of that. Well, you know what? I would also argue too, though. Now we're in a different boat, and I still think this is relevant for everybody listening today, where it's like we are confident, but we can be like too confident. We can be like, well, I've already done this. I'm sure it'll be fine. Da, da, da. And I really think it's this constant, like, you just constantly have to be checking yourself. Being like, okay, does this actually make sense? Like, really analytically thinking, like really driving, like rethinking the way you would attack a problem over and over again to make sure that you're actually like legit. Like, I know most of the time the things that we messed up were when Chris and I immediately agreed. When we were both like, oh, yeah, it's a great idea. And we just go and do it. Like, that thing would fail, like almost guaranteed.
Interesting.
Because we didn't fight enough about it.
Yeah,
which sounds kind of
like,
weird.
you got to play devil's advocate sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So we didn't do that.
Yeah.
So tell me about your leadership team. Like, do you have a co-founder, or is it just you?
No, solo founder. But early on, about like 2 years in, hired my CEO, Rachel, who's been incredible.
Sweet.
And so I think that was one of those like big strategic moves that also made no sense at the time. I think there's a lot of moments where in my entrepreneur journey, but also specifically with Longplay, just around like, oh, that made no sense, but I trusted my gut on it.
Cool.
Based on like just first principles on like what I wanted to build. And so, you know, at that stage we were already 7 figures, but it was like a lot of money in, a lot of money out.
Okay.
Kind of situation, right? It's like we had a lot of traction, like clear product market fit, like more clients than we can take on. We had a team of 15 and I was still running everything by myself and just trying to like keep the train on the tracks was kind of where it was at.
Yeah.
And profitability was like, okay, enough for me to pay myself and pay the team, but like by no means did I feel comfortable. Like you're still survival mode.
It's still pretty tight.
And then I was like, let's bring on a COO that is a 6-figure salary, which like no one's hiring a COO for an agency at 7 figures. Even like 8-figure agencies is usually when you start hiring a COO. So brought it on pretty early, and I think that was a great, that was just a great way to like kind of stabilize everything. And we ended up going through this process of like, we had to go through an entire team overhaul, entire cultural overhaul. Like,
wait, what happened? That's
that's in itself a whole story. But the long story short is we were growing really quickly, and we went through a period where we had so much team turnover. Like we would get into these situations where a team member would send like no notice, resign, send long emails about like a toxic workplace culture, XYZ. I'm like, and I was like, I'm so confused. Like I genuinely want to know what's going on, but I'm so blindsided and I don't understand. Like I'm like, I've repeatedly said like work-life balance is really important. Like we're not pushing them. I'm like, how to take work off your plate. So I'm like, I don't understand. Long story short is, my creative director at that time, he'd been with me for a year. He was also like one of the most experienced people I'd hired. He turned out to be like the equivalent of like a Tinder swindler. So he would actually defraud landlords. And he was on the Toronto, long story short, was like we found he was on the Toronto police, like Toronto Star.
What?
As a like convicted or like, I don't know, like 83 counts of fraud or something or the other.
Holy shit.
He would find women, be with them, and then have them co-sign leases and then defraud. So this was like his thing. And then there was an interview with the police talking about like, he was like, I'm so great at this. Like the police should just hire me. Like he was a full-on sociopath.
Whoa.
But he was great with clients. Great designer.
Great customer success guy.
Like in terms of like the initial interaction, but like the actual delivery was not that great. But he was so great at smoke screening. So he would gaslight the team. He would gaslight me. He would gaslight my COO. It was like a whole thing. Whoa. And it went through this moment where I was like, burn this whole thing down. I'm like, there's a cancer somewhere, but I can't figure out what is happening, because everyone is pointing fingers at everyone else and no one's pointing them at the right person. So like, what is happening right now? And then we had, you know, one girl quit, and she was like, I owe you guys everything. Like, you guys changed my life. I'm so loyal to you, but you can't stay. I'm like, what is happening? Like, I don't understand. It makes no sense. And then she was like, she ended up sending it to our HR person at the time. She was like, don't tell them, but like this police thing. And we're like wow. Because I think our team thought we knew, which is a reasonable thing.
Like it would seem
reasonable. We just like really didn't know. And so,
that's
when that whole thing, and then had to let him go. And I was like, that week was like hell, because we had to figure out like legally what to do.
Yeah,
like,
that's really complicated.
And then like HR stuff, what to do. But also like he was the main point person with a lot of our clients. So I was convinced, and I'd started to come off client calls. And so I was convinced that the company would burn down. Like by the time we let him go, like I remember my CEO saying like, what are you making this decision off of? Like, what are your priorities? And I'm like, the team safety, then our clients, then the business. And she's like, okay, if that's the case, then we like, you got to let him go, like regardless of what happens.
100%. Yeah.
So we let him go. Weirdest termination of all time. Like we had a legal letter. We just
was he like, why?
No, so he had given us a fake name.
What?
And so it was weird because the legal.
This is like a TV show. This is a TV show.
This is the whole story.
It's like CSI Toronto or
we're
whatever.
definitely blowing past. We're definitely blowing past this like 30-minute podcast.
No, we're fine. We're fine. Hey, we got people listening right now.
But
True Crime Toronto.
Well, the Toronto or the legal lawyer was like, you can't tell him you found these things, because then it can be discrimination, apparently.
Okay.
As like a reason to let him go. So I was like, that's why it was such a weird situation, because we're like, how do we do this?
You have to like terminate without cause.
Without cause. So we had to find like reasonable cause just from like a strict business standpoint. Yeah. But also somehow you had taken over like Google admin access without us knowing.
Sick.
And there was some creepy stuff where like every time I logged in, like at 2 a.m., suddenly his Slack would pop up. So it's like, what was like and then weird email login, log out stuff. So we were like, what's happening right now? So that was happening. And then we couldn't disclose these things on like why we let him go. So we had to find like a probable cause, which I didn't feel good about because now I feel like I'm lying. Like I feel like I'm making things up to fire someone when I'm like, that's not the real reason. Like I want to speak my truth, but like we can't. But at the end, we found out he was using a fake name. And so the lawyer's like, oh, you can actually put his real name as like the sign off. So like I was like, yes, like that means he knows we know, but it's all like proper.
Sick.
Yeah. Whoa.
And so that was like my moment of
shade,
like,
hey, heads up,
I'm like, we know, we all know what's going on here.
That is,
and we had to like trick him to get on a call and be like, we have to like a 15-minute touch point about something. And then we just had to, and then the lawyer was like, don't say anything outside of the script. Like just literally screen share and like read the letter because he's probably recording.
Yeah.
So if you say anything like, I'm so sorry that this, like, I'm so sorry we have to do this, like that, I'm so sorry can then be used later on.
I know like it's pretty tough in Ontario.
It's just there's so much legal stuff. And so
holy moly.
That was, anyway, so we went throughout that whole process. I was like convinced by the end of it. I was sick for like 3 days just from like sheer energetic collapse. And then I was like convinced that the company was going to be, I'm like, our entire team's going to quit. All the clients are going to leave. Like there was too much riding on this person.
Yeah.
From that point on, I was like never putting all my eggs on like a single point person.
Oh man, totally. We didn't have that. But you know, we've had, you know, at times in our company, we had empire builders that we ran into and kind of like where they kind of aggregate a lot of like either the customers or knowledge or whatever, or both in some cases. And you know, the lesson that I took out of that, because I had this same fear. I was like, once this person leaves, where are we going to be as a company? And being the point person for a lot of customers as well. And I learned that after we let them go and we kind of, you know, got a few weeks out, I was like, okay, and I mean this the right way, but no employee is essential. You are the most essential. The founders are the most essential in our case. But no employee, like employees can be replaced, particularly when they are being investigated by the Toronto Police Force. Like, wow.
Yeah.
You know, I was always worried about like what customers would say when there was a key contact. And I've had a few empire builders leave over our time, but most time the customers are just like, oh, okay, no problem. Let's just switch to the new person.
Like, as long as you can continue delivering, it's never as critical.
They know your company or your team like delivers. So it's not as big a deal as you make it out to be in your own mind, I think. Yeah.
So what would you taking that experience, what would you, because I'm doing a hard pivot here on this conversation.
You're like, this was not in the list of
not in the script. I'm just going to throw the iPad away. So what, like, we just told the story. What would you tell, how do you help an entrepreneur prevent getting into a situation like that? Maybe not exactly the same, of course, but what's the advice there? What's the key learning? What's the piece to take away?
Yeah, I think when I reflect on my journey, the biggest mistakes are like those critical, like, oh my God, that was hell on earth moments were always the consequence of like multiple decisions that led up to that, right?
Sure.
Like, for example, if I had made that hire, but we were just 2 months in and then I was like, oh, things aren't going so well, cool, like let him go. There actually isn't. We might never have found out and it just was never a thing, right? It was like how much like brand equity, client equity, team equity was built up in this person that like all of it was hinging on this do or die type of scenario.
Yeah. Right.
And so I find those do or die scenarios are typically quite preventable early on. And so I think the first thing is like, I was just growing really quickly. And I think the first year I did get caught up in wanting to just like, I want to be like a quote unquote real entrepreneur and like
you are a real entrepreneur.
Thank you. I made it, Mom.
Anybody listening
Mom,
to you
look,
are
I'm on TV.
Yeah. We have our first caller. No, sorry.
And so like I was like, I want to be a real entrepreneur, and like to me at that time, it was like a real entrepreneur is $1 million in revenue.
Sure.
And so I did everything I could to like just hit $1 million in revenue, which meant it was kind of like building a house on quicksand. Whereas like, we're going, but then we're constantly like just trying to keep up. And when you're just trying to keep up constantly, you're going to make bad decisions in that whole process because you don't give yourself the time to think, and you just need to make the hire. You just need someone to come in. You just need someone to take over the team. And that's when those rush decisions are made.
Yeah.
And so I think that was like really like at the core of how we got there. It was that rush of trying to like keep up.
And that also kind of like makes sense as to why you moved into sort of the long play mentality, right? Because you made bad decisions, you understood that, and then you learned from that. And you're like, okay, let's think longer term here rather than building the house on quicksand, as you suggested.
Yeah, and I think it was like, it's interesting because like mindset wise, I was always thinking about the long game, but I had to learn the emotional discipline of like, what does it actually look like to play that? And what it looks like to play that is like, sometimes you can feel like you're moving too slow. Like sometimes you have to take 2 steps back. And when I look at the trajectory of Longplay, like we grew so fast revenue wise the first year, and then our actual revenue pretty much plateaued for the next 2 to 3 years, but our profit increased by like,
Then what's the problem?
ridiculous amounts, you know.
Right.
And I'm like, and my quality of life, I'm like, I feel like I have a solid 9 to 5 in terms of stability.
Nice.
For my own business, but like having that ended up becoming the stepping stone to actually building something significant.
Cool.
But we really had to like not focus on revenue
Right.
for 2 to 3 years and just focus on like profitability, cash in bank, team like structure, stability, like all things stability before we could focus on revenue again. And then by the time we were ready to focus on revenue again, we were like, yeah, it doesn't really matter because we're doing great. And then the revenue kind of naturally increases, right?
Nice.
And I think that's where, like you said, the money just comes when you're doing things the right way.
Yeah, you find your groove, and then all of a sudden it starts to feel easier, which is a great feeling because it's rough for the first little while. Yeah.
First 3 years, I think, is just hell on earth.
Yeah.
We had another guy who was like, I don't know if I can. His name was Matt Watson. I shouldn't just be like other guy. And he's had multiple successful businesses, and he's like, I don't know if I can do 0 to $1 million again. Because he's like, I've done it a few times. He's like, I'm just exhausted. It's so hard to do.
Yeah,
that.
he was like, I'll buy a business that's like doing $1 million in revenue, and then I'll grow it to the next echelon. But I don't want to do the 0 to $1 million again. I thought that's very interesting because it is the toughest part. Is that saying your first $1 million is the toughest?
Yeah, that's what somebody told us in our co-working space. And it was like, yeah, actually, you're right. Anyway, Jess, whoa, this was a great conversation. Like genuine whoa moment there. That was very interesting. Little left turn there about 3/4 of the way through. Thank you so much for joining us. That was a really cool conversation. And I think people will probably take a lot from it, which is pretty cool. And folks, that's all for our episode today of Startup Different. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you next week as we debrief this interview. And we're looking forward to it. See you then.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the episode. Nicely done. If you enjoyed this episode, like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so the almighty algorithm can help others find us. Want more from Startup Different? Check out our book, Startup Different, the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business. Follow us on social. We're big on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also check us out at startupdifferent.com. Special thanks for this episode to Graham and our friends at Toronto Podcasts. Visit them at torontopodcast.ca. See you next week.